I live in a pretty nice upper-middle-class neighborhood. There is very little crime in my town. Although, there have been quite a few robberies in my neighborhood. I was in probably 4th or 5th grade, so around 10 years old. My parents were out. I don't remember where. Probably a movie or a friend's house. But I didn't mind. I was at an age where being home alone was exciting and new. My mom had left me in the family room with snacks and the TV remote to keep me occupied. Around 10 o'clock, I heard the doorbell ring. My parents had taught me not to answer the door when they weren't home, so I did exactly that. It made me a little uneasy, but I chose to assume it was just a solicitor, and that if I ignored it, they would be on their way. Kind of naive considering it was 10 at night. A few moments later, it rang again. Starting to feel a little more spooked, I tiptoed to the kitchen, in fear of them hearing me, and grabbed the home phone. Then I snuck back into the TV room and took my seat back on the couch with the security of the phone at hand. That's when the knocking began. With that, I became more scared, as this person seemed intent on someone answering the door. My logical side tried to rationalize over my fear and assumed my parents came home early and had forgotten their house keys. Still having fear in the back of my mind, though, I didn't answer the door, but instead called my mom asking if it were her knocking. The phone rang and was sent to voicemail. I became a little more nervous, but told myself that I was a big kid now. I had to be brave. I can't let every little thing scare me. That was until the pounding began. With that first bang, all my 10-year-old bravery melted away. I immediately ran to the kitchen, grabbed the biggest knife I could find, and took cover behind my couch with my weapon and the phone. The banging only seemed to get louder as I continually called my mom. She finally picked up and told me that she was busy and to stop bothering her. I told her someone was at the door and she just said I was being paranoid. With this, I thought maybe I was being paranoid. This added into my reasoning to not call the police. If my own mother didn't believe me, why would the police? I was also scared that if they did come, the person banging would be gone already, and I would be called a liar along with my parents getting in trouble for leaving me alone. Finally, the banging stopped, and I came out after what seemed about half an hour of hiding in case it started again. My parents finally came home and told me that I had to stop making up stories because lying was bad. I was convinced I was crazy, but was still scared to be home alone for quite some time. It wasn't until I was 15 that I brought up the occurrence again, and my dad shared with me the most disturbing news I have ever heard. That night, after what I was told was just paranoia and lies, my dad did go out and investigate around the house and found a dent, dirt and other damage around the handle and lock, which is the area that is kicked when breaking a door open. I do remember us getting a new front door when I was 10, but I never connected it to my experience. I can't believe, 1, that my parents would make me think I was crazy like that, but 2, that someone actually tried to break into my house. It still gives me the chills thinking about it, and what could have happened to me if the intruder did get in. This happened to me about 2 years ago when I was 17. My family went out for the day to go shopping for food, and I stayed home alone. I was in my room, playing games on my PC with my headphones on, and I always keep my door closed. After about an hour, I got up to use the bathroom. Both the bathroom and my room are on the 2nd floor, and our house at the time was a 2-story detached house in West Belfast, Northern Ireland. When I got back to my room, I remember closing the door and continuing to play games. About 30 minutes later, I went to check my phone but realized I left it in the bathroom. I got up to go get it and noticed my door was slightly ajar. Now, my house isn't drafty, and I know the door is good and doesn't just open due to wind or whatever, so it caught me off guard. But I reasoned that I probably just didn't close it all the way and headed out to get my phone, I came back and continued to play, making sure I closed the door on my way back in. Sometime later, I heard my family come back home. I heard them bringing the first load of shopping into the kitchen and going out to the car to get more. When they came back in, they called my name, and I headed downstairs. When I came down, I saw that the back patio door was wide open. They asked me if I had been out the back at any point while they were away, and I told them I hadn't. We looked outside and saw one of the deck chairs pulled over to a lower part of the fence, facing a small area of woodland leading into another street, obviously not where it should be. This shocked me, and my mind raced with ideas of what the hell was going on. My own personal theory is that somebody had managed to get in, most likely through the back door. They had gone to see if the house was clear, then went upstairs, opened my door, and saw me. They must have decided to wait downstairs for some reason, maybe thinking I would leave or they could ambush me. But they got scared and hid when my family returned, using the fact they had left the kitchen to bring in more shopping to slip out as fast as they could, and used the chair to get over the fence. Even with this idea, I don't understand why they would risk coming in, given that it was the middle of the day. Plus, if they had seen I had headphones on, why not just come up behind me and deal with me then? The worst thing about it is I have no concrete proof of what happened that day. I have no idea why someone came in, how they got in, who they were. But one thing I feel certain of is that somebody did come into my house that day. There's more to this story though. A week or so later, it's late at night, and I'm in my room playing games. While playing, I end up drifting off to sleep. I am woken up by my mom coming in and shaking me, asking me if I was outside. I told her no, I've been here all night. I was asleep. She explains to me that while she was lying in bed, she heard the back door slap, and as her room was just above the kitchen and back door, she felt the shake of the slam. My stepdad was working night shift at the time, so it was only me, my mom, and sister in the house. I go downstairs to check to see if everything's okay. The door is wide open. Our back garden was in pitch black darkness, so not knowing if anyone was out there, I close and lock the door and looked around the garden from the inside with a torch. I don't see anyone outside and decide to stay downstairs for a few hours, keeping a lookout. The next day, we changed the locks. The strange thing about both of these instances is that nothing was stolen. None of our things were missing, and it seemed that nothing had been really moved or any drawers looked through. I have absolutely no explanation for this, and to this day, it baffles me. We had discussed getting the police involved, but we felt that because there was no serious evidence of a crime taking place, and that we would be moving out of that house in a matter of weeks, unrelated to all of this, we decided there wouldn't really be anything that they could do to help. So we just had our locks changed and made absolutely sure to keep things locked and watched until we had moved out. It was around 6 p.m. in November 2018. I'm from England, meaning it was already pitch black outside at this time of the year. I had just got home from work and was sat in my room upstairs, just watching YouTube on my laptop. My mum shouted up to me that she was just going to pick my brother up from work and would be stopping off at the petrol station on the way back, so she would be gone for a little bit, and asked if I wanted to come. I said no, and carried on with my video. I heard her close the front door and pull out of the driveway. I was 17 at the time, so being home alone at night was nothing new to me, and I was used to the eerie feeling of it. But after around 10 minutes, I started hearing noises coming from downstairs. At first, I thought nothing of it and just related it to my cat, noisily searching for food in an empty bowl, until I remembered him sitting at the end of my bed. I paused my video and listened more at the sound of banging on the back door. This instantly creeped me out, until it was followed by the sound of keys jangling, and I just thought, oh, my mum must have just dropped my brother off before going to the petrol station, and he's just trying to go outside. So I let the noise continue as I kept watching my video. He can get quite angry sometimes, so the loud banging was nothing out of the ordinary, but it just kept carrying on. Banging and the sounds of keys jangling, then dropping, then banging again. Then the fear really hit me. I don't think it's him. I walked out of my room slowly and sat on the stairs listening carefully to the noise. It definitely wasn't him. I'm a very anxious person, and everyone gets those times late at night when they hear noises and immediately think the worst. This was just one of those, I told myself. So I decided to bite the bullet and just walk straight into the kitchen and face whatever it was causing the noise. Our kitchen has the door straight to the garden. But as I turned the corner into the kitchen, I heard a loud bang and clatter of footsteps run away. The cat flap had been ripped off the door, and there was plastic from it everywhere. In fear, I still tried to console myself into thinking it could be anything other than people breaking in. I sat back on the stairs and called my mum just to check again that it wasn't my brother home early and just in a bad mood. But then he answered my mum's phone while still in the car. "Are you at home?" I shouted at him. "No." Then my voice started to break with terror. "Please be serious. Are you at home right now?" "No. What do you want?" Even though he said he wasn't, I still begged in my mind that he was joking just to get a scare out of me. But he heard how scared I was and began to worry. I explained to him what happened, and he started to scream at me to call the police. He's never been the protective type, but I could tell now he was really worried and told my mum to rush back home straight away. Whilst dialing 999, I tried so hard to stay calm. I told them exactly what was happening as I hid back in my room with the door tightly locked. Then I heard talking and the banging of doors again downstairs. They were back. I burst into tears to the dispatcher out of pure fear and sat on the phone for what felt like forever until my mum, brother, and police all pulled up at the same time. Everyone charged through the house to the back door, and we instantly saw what they'd done. The people saw the keys to the back door on the side in the kitchen, took a broom from outside, broke it in half on the door handle, got the broom through the cat flap, knocked the keys off the side, and pulled them through the cat flap. Although out of pure luck, as they broke the broom in half, they also managed to snap off the door handle, making it impossible for it to be opened from the outside. Otherwise, they would have got in, no questions asked, and I would have been sat quietly in my room completely oblivious. It was clear afterward that they had been watching the house for a while, waiting until the exact moment they saw my mum's car pull out of the drive. I'm not sure if they knew I was there alone or not, but I know that after they initially saw me and ran away, they made a choice to come back. I'm a 14-year-old girl, and I, like the majority of teenagers, enjoy being home alone. My dad works from home, so very rarely does this happen. But when the opportunity arises, I will take it. One day, both my parents decided to take my brother to chess class and then go shopping in a strip mall nearby. They asked if I wanted to come, but seeing the chance to binge eat Halloween candy and watch Dexter with the sound turned up all the way, I decided to stay home. They tried to convince me to come, but I don't like going outside, so I stayed. They left a couple minutes later. I settled in for a few hours of peace with a mountain of Twix and Kit Kats and the glory that is Michael C. Hall. I don't know what chemicals those candy people put in this stuff, but I'm not complaining. After a few episodes, the candy was gone, and all I had left were the shiny wrappers that I would probably sell my soul for. I went to throw them out and mourn the loss of the glorious chocolate caramel cookie that is Twix, when I saw that the trash can was near overflowing. It was about 6:30 by now, but dark enough to basically be the middle of the night. I wasn't exactly comfortable to go outside in the dark, especially when the house next to me hasn't had anyone living in it for the past 2 years, which means bank people or whatever are constantly walking around it. However, the garbage bin is right next to the garage door, and I can get outside and back in about 5 seconds. So I decided to risk it. I went outside, threw the trash away, and as I was turning to go back in, I saw a man walking by. This isn't really that uncommon, as I live on a busy street and I live in an upper middle class area, so there's not that much crime and people go walking at night all the time. I thought it was kind of weird that he was wearing all black, because normally people want to be seen in the dark so they don't get hit by cars. But it didn't seem that strange. He was on his phone and didn't even look up at me, which I was thankful for, because I was wearing a nightgown and my hair was a mess. I ran back inside and hit the button that closed the garage door. As it was slowly climbing down, the man raced inside. I was in shock. I stared at him. We made eye contact. He didn't have crazy eyes or anything. He looked perfectly normal. The garage door shut, and he smiled wide. I shrieked and slammed the door that led into the garage shut and locked it. He started yelling at me about just wanting to be friends. I called my parents. I probably should have called the police, but I didn't want them to come home and have this strange man jump out and attack them once they got inside. They didn't pick up, of course. I texted them frantically, then called the 911, who said they would send out a squad car. The next 10 minutes were probably the most frightening moments of my life. The operator stayed on the phone with me and told me not to go outside in case he had anyone else out there, but I could hear him in the garage. He didn't try to break the door down or anything. Instead, he scratched it and jiggled the doorknob and called for me to open the door, which was probably scarier than if he just tried to break the door down. I heard the garage door open and close, and then the police came. The guy was outside, sitting in front of the garage of the empty house next door. He said he was a landscaper and that he just wanted to talk with me, and that we had spoken before and were friends. I was basically hysterical at this point, and with my sugar-addled brain, I couldn't even form coherent sentences. The cops did arrest him, and my parents came home. They saw I was all right, and then seemed more concerned about the car that was in the garage than about me. I can't blame them. That car is older than I am and has sentimental value. I'm not going to go out again at night, ever, and am probably never going to open a garage door again. This happened in December of 2011 while I was on college semester break. I grew up in rural Texas with about 1,000 people in my hometown. Shortly after my parents' divorce, I moved to a large city for college and made it a tradition every year to visit my family for the holidays in the boonies of Texas. After the divorce, my mom had just recently moved to a nearby town with around 100 people, where her house was located on the very outskirts of town, surrounded by miles of cornfields in almost every direction of her home. There was a side paved road about 100 feet of her house that basically was a dead end until you reached a certain point, and directly across the other side of the road was in fact miles of fields of corn. The only neighbor she had was about half a mile north of her house, who was a truck driver and basically was never home much of the year. Anyway, needless to say, it was pretty secluded, and pretty much the only thing close to civilization was about 15 miles away. This particular winter break was different because my mom and brother, who lived in the same city as me attending a different college, was going to travel to Boston to visit my grandparents, and my mom needed someone to dog sit while they were away. So, after a few days of having the house to myself in the middle of nowhere, I am particularly bored, so I decided to put the harness on my dog and take a walk around the area in no particular direction. We finally end up following the dead-end road and turn back as it starts to get darker and the wind starts picking up because a cold front was coming through. By this time, I am slightly more frustrated with myself because I could start to smell the rain, and my dog can be particularly stubborn, because he basically likes to walk me instead of the other way around. Anyway, as we start walking back, it's starting to get a bit more colder, and it is drizzling now, and I start to walk a bit faster. We are almost jogging back now to the house when all of the sudden my dog stops abruptly. I initially think it's just him being stubborn, but he starts leading me into the direction of the cornfields. I'm thinking that this is just one of those cases where he locks onto a scent and cannot let it go until he goes directly up to it, or I have to pick him up to lead him back on track. Well, I basically don't allow him to go very far, and we are directly in front of the fields when all of the sudden he starts barking, similar to how he barks when he sees another person. I finally pick him up and we run back home, both pretty damp and cold by now. I dry up and then take a bath. It's evening time now, and after making something to eat, my dog and I start winding down for the night. We watch a bit of TV in the living room and by 10 p.m. call it for the night. It's still very much windy outside at this time, though it never did storm, only rained a bit. We go into the bedroom and my dog burrows underneath the blankets and I pass out shortly after. Several hours later, I wake up to my dog awake and growling on my bed in the direction of the window. I hear rustling outside and think that it's likely other animals. But I'm kind of drowsy still, so I get out of bed and pick up my dog and coral him to the living room couch, where I turn on the TV to drown out the rustling noises. My dog burrows underneath the blankets again, and I'm just about to fall asleep when I hear a thud outside. I thought to myself, what the hell was that? And of course my dog is wide awake again, barking and growling. I'm pretty much wide awake now, and I kind of start getting annoyed with my dog, so I basically turn up the TV to hopefully drown out the rustling outside once again. I swear to God, 25 minutes later at 1:30 a.m. I hear a knock on the back door. All hell broke loose with my dog, and he literally is about to jump off the couch and dash to the door. I caught him last minute and started to just hold him in place while we are both freaking out. I really don't remember what I did at that very moment, but somehow my dog started to calm down again. I'm pretty sure I blacked out, because there is a literal period of where I don't remember anything. Shortly thereafter, I don't hear any more rustling of leaves coming from outside, and my dog is now silent and ready to burrow again underneath the blankets. We doze off to slumberland only to wake up 30 minutes later to another knock on the front door. I literally feel my heart pumping so damn fast that I grabbed the landline and dial 911. My dog is now at the door, barking furiously. I reach the adjacent town's 911 emergency service and frantically state what is happening. The police was on their way, but it was going to take a while to get to my house. I stay online with the dispatcher, and things start to calm down again, and I basically state that I'm pretty sure I got it from there until the police arrive. I hang up and very carefully look out the side window only to see a man standing directly in front of the door. No movement from him at all, just the blank stare at the door. I grab the mace and my dog and state very loudly that the police are on their way. No reply back. I'm literally thinking the guy was on drugs at this point. I open the front door. It's locked, and it would take effort to get in. I look into his face and basically ask what he wants, and told him that the police are about to be here. He just stares blankly. After like 20 seconds, he opens his mouth and asks if I want to play a game with him. I immediately shut the door and yell back furiously, fuck, absolutely not. I wait in the bedroom and watch him on my porch for about 5 minutes, just staring blankly at the door. No movement whatsoever. He finally turns around and just walks away. About 20 minutes later, the cops show up, and I'm basically describing everything frantically. I literally peed my pants earlier with how terrifying it was. The cops state that there is a guy in my town that has schizophrenia and is going through late-stage Alzheimer's and sometimes wanders around people's homes. Needless to say, they found him and took him back to his caretakers. The cops asked if I had anywhere else to go. I packed everything up and bolted to my father's house with my dog and stayed there for the remainder of the break. I must have been around 8 years old at the time this happened, and my sister was 12 or 13. We lived in a tiny little house we called the Shack that our mom moved us into after she split up with our father. It was all we could afford. My sister and I shared a tiny bedroom, but one perk about the house was the huge backyard with a large above-ground pool and deck we would always play on. We had a big privacy fence, and being the nosy little kid I was, I liked to climb on some of the wooden boards of the fence and check out the neighbors. I recognized the 2 little boys who lived in the house kitty corner to us because they went to my school. I made it a habit every day to climb up my side of the fence and hang around and talk to them. I never climbed over the fence, just climbed a plank so I was high enough to peer over and talk. They had an uncle named Randy who was probably in his mid-20s to 30s, and he was usually in the backyard doing housework, so I got to know him as well, and both my sister and I would hang on the fence and chat with him most days. The conversations were always innocent, and he seemed like a nice guy. Now looking back, I can see some red flags about him. I remember one time he had a basketball and accidentally threw it over our fence. We offered to grab it for him, but he insisted he could get it himself and hopped over the fence with ease. We thought nothing of it at the time, but I imagine this was to test out how easily and fast he could scale the fence. One day in passing, my sister mentioned to him that our mom works the night shift, and therefore it was just the 2 of us alone at night in the house. Well, that was all he needed to hear. Shortly after that, it happened. I woke up one night to the sound of my sister crying. We shared a bunk bed, me on the bottom, and when I stood up, she was out of bed leaning against the wall on the phone crying. I asked her what was wrong, but she assured me everything was fine and to go back to sleep, so I did. It wasn't until the next day that I learned what happened. Apparently, in the middle of the night while our mom was away at work, Randy jumped the fence and tried to break in. He started banging on our bedroom window, telling my sister to let him in. She refused, but he wouldn't take no for an answer. So he started walking around the entire house, banging on windows, yelling for her to let him in, and trying all the doors. That's when she got out of bed and called 911, and I woke up. Of course, by the time the cops arrived, all he had to do was jump the fence in 10 seconds, and he was back in his yard. They knocked on his door, but he denied he did it, so the police said there was nothing they could do. We were shaken by the incident, of course. My mom wasn't able to change her work schedule, so she started having us stay at our dad's at night. A few years passed without incident, and we assumed everything was fine. I had long stopped talking to the boys next door. Then, it happened again. My sister was a couple years older now and had a group of her friends over for a sleepover one night. We had a sliding glass door to the backyard near where they were all sitting. The door had the typical vertical blinds, except weeks earlier one of them had broken, and we couldn't get it to stay back on, no matter what, so there was a gap in between the blinds where the broken one was gone. Anyway, the girls were all sitting around the couch playing board games when one of my sister's friends suddenly turned rigid. She said, "Don't freak out, but there's a guy standing at your sliding glass door." They all turned around, and there was Randy again, his face pressed up to the glass where the gap in the blinds was, just watching them all. Naturally, everyone freaked out, and 911 was called. And just like last time, he jumped the fence and the cops said they couldn't prove anything, even though they described what he was wearing, and he answered the door in the same outfit when the police questioned him. That was the last straw, so we moved out of that house and got a restraining order against him. He didn't show up to court that day, so the judge automatically granted us the order. We never saw him again. Last I checked, I looked him up online, and he's currently in prison for a bunch of random charges. So this happened to me a few years ago in April, and I still can't shake off how terrifying and strange it was. I was home alone, getting ready for my college class that morning, and I opened my blinds to let some natural light in. I glanced out my window to see a man in his mid-30s wearing a baseball cap roaming around my property, with his hands on his hips, walking with a lot of weird confidence. Our yard is kind of like a cliff, and it looks over onto our 5 acres of property down below. I live in the Pacific Northwest, so it's a pretty scenic view. I was really confused and thought maybe it was a worker that my mom had hired for our renovations on the house, admiring the view. I'm a little bit uncomfortable at this point because the dude walks to the side of my house out of sight. I head upstairs to see him now roaming around my front yard and my driveway, looking at things, checking out my house, etc. He still hasn't seen me at this point. I call my dad and ask him if we have hired anyone to come by the house, and he says not that he knows of and tells me he's going to call my mom and ask her, and then call me back. I'm waiting for the call when I notice this strange dude's car. It's a white Honda with no license plates, just parked parallel to my front door. The man still hasn't seen me, and he's still wandering around, so I take this as an opportunity to remember that we have a security system, and I armed it, so if he did try to break in, it would immediately alert the police. If this was some sort of professional or worker, he would have rang my doorbell or knocked at least once. He did neither. Just then, I get a call back from my dad saying neither him nor my mom hired anyone to come by today, and that I need to call our local police station immediately. I went back downstairs after making sure to lock every door and window upstairs and called my city's police station. I explain to a woman on the other end what is happening, and she decides that she's not going to send an officer out, and instead gives me a number to call their emergency dispatch line and told me to talk to them. I call the number she gave me, and immediately I get an automated message saying, "Thank you for calling my town's name non-emergency hotline. Nobody is available to take your call right now. If this is an emergency, please hang up and dial 911. At this point, I'm really irritated because 15 minutes have passed, and this weird dude is still lurking around my house while I'm home alone. And apparently, that wasn't enough to warrant an emergency to the lady I called at my local police department. I hung up and decided to call 911. After getting in touch with the operator, I was asked a series of questions about his appearance before they would even alert officers near me to start heading toward my house. The whole thing seemed really weird. Nobody was in a hurry to have officers come up to my place when I was a younger girl, home alone with a strange man. I asked the officer if I could stay on the line with her when she finally, after what seemed like forever, alerted police to come to where I was. She agreed, and I went back upstairs to check on the weird guy, and he's now sitting in his unplated Honda, either listening to a radio show extremely loudly or on a phone call with someone through his car. It was a very prominent, loud male voice coming from his car. Then all of a sudden, I hear the tone you hear when someone hangs up on you, and the operator was no longer on the line. I was really confused when my thoughts were interrupted by an unrecognized phone number calling me. I assumed it was the operator calling me back, so I picked it up. Instead, I was greeted by really creepy heavy breathing. I'm not sure whose it was, but it really freaked me out. I hung up immediately and dialed back 911. I had been pretty calm up to this point, but that phone call put me in panic mode. I got on the phone with another operator who already knew my situation and address before I could even explain it to her. She said the cops were on their way. 20 minutes had passed at this point. The dude is still here in his car, and the cops aren't. Keep in mind I live in a smaller town, so there is no reason why it took the cops as long as it did to come down. Finally, this guy is leaving my driveway right as the cops pull in, and they stop him and ask him a few questions. A cop then comes to my door and hands me a sketchy-looking flyer saying it was just a landscaper. He said he had an appointment. I was really relieved and irritated that it was just a dude my mom had hired, until I realized it wasn't. I called my mom back and said, "The cops said it was just a landscaper that you hired and that he had an appointment." My mom replies with, "I can assure you we never hired a landscaper. We don't even need one." My sister and I were left home alone for the night because our parents were attending the graduation party of one of my brother's friends. Frankly, I was looking forward to a night of freedom, and I also happened to be closer with my sister than I was with anyone else. After they left, we watched a movie and played some games. I was only about 11 at the time and she was 15, so my judgment varied from hers greatly. It was around 10 p.m. when both of us noticed a flashing of lights on the wall across from us. This shimmering was clearly coming from the front door, which was mostly made up of a window that allowed all light to pass through. She was a bit unsettled because we lived in a remote area and seldom had visitors. I had no sense of threat since I was too young and told her I would check it out. When I went to peer out the front door, I saw a cluster of maybe 3 cars making their way around the loop we had in front of our house. To be clear, this wasn't shared with other houses. In fact, we didn't live in a neighborhood. It was a private drive. I figured they were probably just lost and turning around as the cars left abruptly. I explained the situation to my sister, and at first she was worried, but as some time passed, she seemed to shrug it off a bit. We finished watching TV and were beginning to clean up around our house when we heard the knob on the entrance door via the garage being fiddled with. It was a bit faint and could have been an animal, which happened a lot. I didn't worry too much, but my sister continued to grow skeptical. This struggling with the knob went on for a minute or so and was accompanied by some jingling and started to sound like something was being stuck in the keyhole. It subsided and then was finished with a firm pound on the door as we heard it echo throughout the house. As someone who was still rather ignorant of danger, I became scared, and my sister looked to me as we were in silence. We paused for about 5 seconds out of shock, and before we could make any movements, we heard the door from our basement open and slam shut. Our basement staircase was across the house, and there was no way one single person could have covered the distance in that time. Using a separate staircase, we crept upstairs with haste. Both of us ran to my sister's room, and we hid in her closet. Once in there, we got on the phone with our parents and informed them. They notified the police and informed us to stay put. In her closet, we fumbled through the dark to grab items that we could use to defend ourselves with. She grabbed her snowboard, which had a sharp metal edge on the end, and I could find nothing better than a sturdy hanger. Both of us breathing heavily, we soon noticed something outgrew the sound of our breaths. We heard footsteps resonate and increase in volume as they clearly came closer and closer to her room. Right as the steps came to a stop, we looked at each other in terror because we knew that this person was now in the room. From under the closet, we saw light pierce through the crack as the switch was flicked. The person walked around the room and began moving stuff as we could hear from behind the door. The rummaging stopped and the footsteps returned. They were distinctly growing much louder, and 2 shadows formed beneath the crack of light under the door where his feet had prevented light from coming through. The noise I will never forget is when the knob on the closet door began to turn. It was met with a stiff halt as we had locked it shut. It was odd. No doors in our house had locks but that one, and thank God it did. He jiggled it a bit, but gave up after a few shakes. His footsteps grew more distant and soon faded. After about 10 minutes, my sister and I started to feel safe as we no longer heard any sounds. She explained to me that the distance from the closet to the window that allowed us on the roof was only about 5 feet. We mustered up the courage and darted for the roof. Once up there, we felt much safer as no one would ever check there. We waited for about 15 minutes, and the cops soon came. They arrived, and we got back into the house. It was as if we were returning to a completely different house. Everything had been trashed and ransacked. The aftermath left us with stolen jewelry, a mess in our house, and an experience I'll never forget. We're just lucky the intruder wasn't able to break down the 1-inch wooden barrier that separated us from him, and I can't imagine what he would have done if he did. This happened when I was 13. I lived in a duplex with my dad and brother. It was a 2-bedroom, and I shared a room with my dad, while my older brother had his own room. It was not uncommon for both of them to have plans at night, while I stayed home to play video games, alone. This night was no different. My dad was probably at some bar, and my brother, who knows where he was. I was playing the original Resident Evil on PlayStation, and at around midnight, my eyelids were getting too heavy, and I decided to go to bed. I slept with my bedroom door wide open. Now, not one time in the years that we lived in this place did my dad or brother come home by entering through the back sliding glass door. A couple of times, my brother didn't have his key for one reason or another, and he knocked on my bedroom window and asked me to let him in. My dad always had his key and would always come home through the front door. On this night, I heard the back door slide open. It was an old door, and sliding it open wasn't easy. It was also very loud, so I heard it crystal clearly. I lay in bed, wide-eyed, my imagination going crazy. I heard whoever it was walk through the dining room, through the kitchen, and then into the living room. They made no attempt to be quiet. After a brief, silent pause, I saw someone walk by my bedroom doorway. This scared the living hell out of me, as you can imagine, and my heart throbbed. Whoever was in my house walked into the bathroom right next to my bedroom and flipped the light on. The light poured into my bedroom, and I was laying there, terrified, completely exposed by the light from the bathroom. Why didn't I shout out for my brother or my dad? Because, like I mentioned earlier, I knew it wasn't them, and there was no one else it could have been that would have made sense. Not a family member, not a friend. I knew it was someone who didn't belong. The person then walked out of the bathroom, left the light on, and went into my brother's room and started making a ton of noise. It sounded like they were searching for something. All I did was lay there, shivering. After a few more minutes, the person walked by my bedroom again. I expected at any moment a stranger would walk into my room, but they didn't. I heard them making noise in the living room, walking around, huffing and puffing. Then they started walking back and forth by my bedroom repeatedly, into the bathroom, and back out, over and over. At the time, I was 100% sure they were messing with me for some reason. They knew I was there, whoever they were. I heard the person making noises. By this, and by the huge figure that I saw walking back and forth, I knew it was a man. They continued walking around each room except the one I was in, and then suddenly, I heard them walk back through the house to the back sliding door, open it, and then leave. I lay there in bed, terrified, wondering what the hell just happened. After a while, out of sheer exhaustion, I fell asleep. In the morning, I found that my dad and brother were home. I have asked both of them dozens of times, and they both promise it was not them. Plus, again, why the hell would they go through the back door, and then leave again through the back door? This was 21 years ago. I'll never know who it was, or why they were there. Nothing was missing either. What really makes me wonder to this day, why the hell did they never come into my bedroom? The door was wide open, and they walked by it at least 20 times. I was 12, and my older sister and I were home alone for the weekend. I was waiting for a friend to pick me up and getting restless. There was a knock on the door, thinking it was her. I ran to answer it without checking through the peephole. A man was standing there with a clipboard and said he needed to check our gas meter. I was entrenched in the disappointment of my friend still not having arrived, so I just told him, "Yeah, sure, whatever you need to do." I didn't notice at the time, but he wasn't dressed as a city official. He had on a green and purple shirt with bold stripes like the host of Blue's Clues. He came in and immediately went up the stairs to where our bedrooms were and walked into the open door of my room, the typical girly girl room with pink and glitter. Thank God, my sister came down the stairs at almost that exact moment. She said, "Oh, is that Daphne's dad? Why is he going upstairs?" And I complained about how Daphne wasn't here, and was going on about how unreliable she was when my sister cut me off. Wait, if Daphne isn't here, who is that?" I said, "He's here to read the gas meters." Her face turned white. She flung open the front door and dragged me out, hand clamped over my protesting mouth. She said, "Our gas meters are outside." Neither of us had a cell phone, it was the 60s, and obviously weren't going back in the house to call authorities on the landline phone. Then my ever-resourceful sister had a stroke of genius. A man was walking right by our house, and she motioned him over. She called loudly into the house, "Oh, Dad, it's good you're home. A man from the city is here to read the gas meters upstairs." And just like she'd hoped, this man on the street said, "What are you talking about?" The man in the striped shirt bolted out of the house. The man on the street asked us repeatedly if we were okay, if we needed him to stay and wait in the yard with us until our parents came home. He was very sweet. We were so startled that we barely thanked him before slamming and locking the doors and windows. As irate as my sister was that I let someone in the house, she begged me not to call the authorities because my parents left her in charge, and she worried she'd be in trouble. I didn't want to catch any heat from carelessly allowing some guy in, so I was on the same page. 3 weeks later, a girl in our community went missing. She was home alone, and authorities found the door open and no signs of forced entry. My sister and I discussed our options, but deep down knew we had no choice but to come clean. We told the police everything. I don't know if it ever helped, but they did tell us they had reason to believe it was the same man. They also tracked down the man who helped us on the street. Turns out we already knew him. He worked in the butcher shop. We just didn't recognize him. He was lifelong friends with the family after that. Our parents were mortified. They weren't angry with us, just glad we were okay, though they did review all the rules of caution and didn't leave us home alone for a while. They found the girl and say she'd been held for a few days and then burned alive. They never caught the man, but fear not. He was in what appeared to be his early 30s in the 1960s, so in any case, he has to be dead by now. I just thank God every day for my sister's resourcefulness and quick action. This happened in 2019. I was in my second year of college and living in a townhome about a 10-minute walk from campus. I lived with 2 other girls at the time, but they were all back at their parents' house for the holiday. I work in healthcare and was working Christmas this year. It was Christmas Eve, and I worked the next day, so I was getting ready for bed, locked the doors, turned the lights off, and went downstairs where my bedroom was. I was scrolling on TikTok for about an hour. It was Christmas Day at this point, when I heard what sounded like the chairs in the kitchen move. The kitchen is right above my bedroom. I thought maybe I was hearing the neighbors next door as we share the same walls, and sometimes they can be loud. But I remembered one of them texting me and asking me to bring in a package they were expecting while they were all gone at home. The noise was short-lived, and so I just brushed it off. Next thing I know, my bedroom door is being opened slowly. In this moment, I get a flashback and remember my second-grade teacher telling us about the time someone broke into her house and she acted as if she were asleep, so if they were just there to rob her, they wouldn't feel the need to hurt her if she saw them. But my phone screen is lighting up my scared face, so I can't act like I'm asleep. So there I was, laying in my bed, shitting myself, while this guy has 1 foot in my bedroom with the door cracked open. It felt like an eternity, but in reality was probably more like 10 seconds of us looking at one another. He slowly takes his foot out and closes my door. I sit there, just in complete, utter shock. I couldn't make out what he looked like as my eyes were adjusting to the dark again from the phone screen. All I could see was a backward baseball cap. I knew I had to call the police, but my anxious ass knew if I called it would alert my parents' phones that I called. Me being dumb as hell was like, well, I don't want to make them worry. Also, I was scared he might still be somewhere in the house, and I didn't know what he would do if he heard me call. So I text the guy I was seeing at the time and tell him, some random guy just broke into my house and came into my room. He snapped me out of it and told me to call the police, and so I did. The dispatcher asked me if I felt comfortable to go unlock the front door for them, so they didn't have to break it down. And I told her, no way, I don't care if the door is broken. I'm not going up there alone. A couple of minutes later, I see flashlights shining through my window. I hear the police knocking at the door and announcing themselves. They got in and asked me where I was. I came out of my room and they came and got me. They told me to wait on the back porch while 2 of them searched the house and 1 stayed with me. It was like that stuff you see in the movies where they have their guns and turn the corner with their partner and everything. They didn't find anyone. And I said nothing looked like it had been taken. They even tried to get fingerprints but were unsuccessful. They then started asking me questions and informed me that the back door was unlocked and had no signs it had been broken. I told them I locked it. Luckily, the guy I was talking to stayed with me that night, but I still couldn't sleep. I kept having to go check every inch of the house over and over. I placed chairs under the door handles on the front door, back door, and my bedroom. The next day, I informed our landlord, and she refused to come out and change the locks, and she never ended up changing them for the rest of the time we lived there. Every time I go to bed now, I triple check all the doors have been locked. Doesn't matter where I am. I have a dog now, and he helps my anxiety of intruders, as well as a recent purchase of a Ring doorbell. I believe it was our old roommate's boyfriend. I think they may have made an extra key for him because he was basically living there. But I don't understand why he didn't do anything. To me, the house, or our belongings. If it were someone random, I don't know why they wouldn't have done what they intended, and that could be many different possibilities. It was the middle of the afternoon on a bright and sunny day in an upper-middle-class residential neighborhood in Australia, in which crime is virtually non-existent. Peak suburbia. The neighborhood was filled with retirees and rosy-cheeked couples with young kids. So I was basically the biggest degenerate this sterile place had to offer, being a disheveled-looking, skateboarding, weed-smoking teenager. Anyway, it's about 3 p.m., and I'm sitting home alone in my room smoking some weed when I hear random rattling noises coming from downstairs. Instantly, I felt anxious and froze because my parents were out of the state at this time, so I knew it couldn't be them coming home. I slowly approached my bedroom door to hear better, and now I hear voices having a conversation downstairs. Maybe it was my uncle or cousins? I then distinctly remember hearing someone say something like, "Save some for me." Now I definitely knew something was seriously wrong. It seemed like they thought no one was home, so I still had the element of surprise. I backed slowly into my room again, closed the door, and called the police. I had barely been on the phone with them for 30 seconds when I heard footsteps coming up the stairs. The next few moments seemed like they happened in a blur of slow motion, but it also felt like it was over in seconds. I heard them ransack all the other rooms upstairs, and then saw two masked intruders open my door and enter my room. First, they snatched my phone off me and hung up on the cops. They started shouting at me to stay on the bed and don't fucking move. They were two skinny males who only looked a couple of years older than me. One of them was brandishing a screwdriver to threaten me with and saying he'd hurt me if I moved. Then he started screaming at me, asking where the money was, where the drugs were, etc. Basically anything of value to these two junky, low-life scumbags. They definitely looked tweaked out on meth or some type of speedy amphetamines. Being high on weed myself made everything seem so surreal, like it wasn't really happening. It also kicked my anxiety into absolute overdrive, and there literally felt like there were alarms and sirens going off in my head. They also snatched my laptop and some other valuable-looking shit, and kept screaming at me not to move, stay on the bed, and asking where the money was, etc. I basically told them I didn't know shit, and to please leave me alone. They were so methed out I don't even know if they heard me. They just kept screaming for money and drugs. After they had ransacked all my drawers and were satisfied they'd taken anything of value, they went down the stairs and out of the house. I was still sort of in shock and disbelief, but I heard an engine rev and looked outside my window to see a white Mercedes, which was later revealed to be stolen from a house down the street just minutes before they hit my house, speed off up the street. I sort of slowly walked around my house, looking at the damage they'd done and the mess they'd left. The house was torn apart. I then quickly got my shit together and grabbed the landline to call my parents out of state and let them know what just happened. They obviously made sure I was okay and told me to call the police right now, so I did. They showed up not long after and started questioning me, and thankfully ignored the reek of weed smoke in my room. Last thing I needed was getting arrested for possession after my house just got broken into. Anyway, the guy with the screwdriver had dropped it on the floor of my room while snatching my shit, and they were able to get fingerprints off that, and they eventually both ended up in jail like they should. There's also a few other notable parts of this story that highlight how fucked up these junkies were. Firstly, at the first house they hit, they ran into the family dog attacking them, and there is CCTV footage of them stabbing the dog in the eye, blinding him. Secondly, at my house, they grabbed a bunch of gold medals from my dad's high school athletics days that looked expensive, but weren't actually worth anything, except extreme sentimental value to my dad. Lastly, after my house while they were driving up the street, they literally snatched a bag from an old lady on the sidewalk before fucking off for good. I just wanted to make those last points to highlight just how worthless and scummy they are.